Hi everyone, welcome to today's session on AWS Cloud Path. My name is Elizabeth and we will be continuing from where we stopped last week. So last week we had completed the AWS 101 workshop, building and managing our web server through the AWS console. Now we will be doing the exact same thing or as close to it as we can via the AWS CLI. That's a command line interface, so not the whole console click part. Now we're going to be starting with our CLI from here on. First thing you would want to do is to open your terminal. Make sure you are ready. To make this bigger so that we can all see. Yeah, I think this is big enough. Okay, so have your terminal open on standby and we would be coming back to it soon. Yes. So back to our workshop. If you're just joining us this week, a quick run through on what we are deploying is here available on the workshop website, AWS Workshop Studio. That's catalog.workshops.aws/AWS101. The architecture is here. We have this already deployed in AWS environment. You may have already pulled down yours, but I left mine so that we can check and verify like what we're creating is exactly like similar. Yes. So we have our network setup and we have the security groups, web server application, load balancer, and our S3 bucket that is storing images or whatever you want to put in your S3 bucket. Basically, that's what we deployed. Of course, the networking I mentioned includes all the different parts, all the gateways, the S3 VPC endpoint, and all that. So we will be moving right up to our CLI part of the application deployment right now. For just a moment, I will be logging into my AWS account. Yes. Yeah, I mentioned that I'm going to leave it running, or rather I left it running. So you should have your instance, you should have the security groups, web server security group, load balancer security group. You should have the load balancers with your target group, your auto scaling group, and then you'll go to the VPC. This is our project VPC that we use. So you should have your VPC and like all the other things that basically we worked with. The NAT gateway, the VPC endpoints, and that's what we should have by the end of this whole session. So we'll move right to it, starting with our CLI, AWS CLI. I want you to there is using the AWS CLI. Yes, so just a quick summary of everything that we would be doing. I mentioned already that looking at the AWS CLI commands, it may look really complex or I don't know, advanced, but not really. It's not. It's just like commands that are, connecting with the AWS API to run the same things that you run in the console. You look at it as you have your console, you are clicking, it's interacting with the AWS API. You have your CLI here, you're running the commands, it's interacting with the same AWS API behind the scenes, just like two different interactive fronts or two different methods to work with the AWS API. Now, there is the command structure that I would like you to look at in the AWS CLI commands. The command structure always follow like the same pattern. I mentioned it, I think the first session or so, that as you use the CLI more, as you get familiar with AWS environments, you see that most things follow a pattern. The IDs, the ARNs, that's the AWS like resource name. Everything follows a pattern that you start to recognize very easily. Same goes with the CLI. Everything starts with the AWS command, and then or AWS executable, and then you have the command, the sub command, and you can have as many options as parameters as allowed by that particular command or sub command. So the top level command here, the top level command, that's this command that you see here, is usually an AWS service. It's really that straightforward, like AWS EC2, AWS VPC, AWS S3, AWS something. It may not be an obvious service that you find in the AWS environment, but it's usually big enough to encapsulate a lot of like sub commands that are related or that perform that same kind of function, or list this thing, describe this thing. That's how it works. So the command is the top level command, and the sub command is usually the operation you want to do on that service that you mentioned just now. The examples we have here is AWS S3 LS. That's list. AWS S3 LS. You see AWS CloudFormation creating. So you mentioned what command, and then you mentioned what operation you want to perform in this command. There are general sub commands that you just realize, like, oh, you are listing, you use the same listing command on different kind, listing sub command on different kind of commands and all that. So this is what we're running will be looking like basically today. All the commands we are going to be running will be looking like this. And normally you wouldn't deploy a whole service using AWS CLI. I wouldn't recommend anyone to do that. But this is an exercise to get more at home and more familiar with how the AWS CLI works, what to do when you encounter issues like troubleshooting. I didn't run this before, so we're going to be running into anything we're running into together, and how to move past things, where to find the information that you need, how to quickly get results from the AWS API, like listing all these S3 buckets. You didn't need to go logging in, navigating to S3 and then checking. You can easily run some commands. So yeah, that's what it's about. And now we can get started. I would go to the AWS API, yeah. No, AWS API documentation. I think it's just better to write it like this. Command line interface. You don't need to cram any of the commands ever in any programming language. The more you use it, the more you get familiar with it, yes. But then when you're dealing with a whole API documentation, I don't think you cram any of the endpoints that you interact with in your head. So feel comfortable to go back to reference it when you need, and research what you're looking for whenever you need it. No need to cram it. Here we are. This is the latest version we're going to be working with. I already showed you some things before, but I mean, you don't need to go through all of them like that. Yeah. So these are all the AWS services that exist. It's a lot. Imagine cramming any of this. It's a lot. So these are what you would call the commands, in quotes. So these are the commands, and then under each command we can now have the sub commands. So we're going to be getting started following still the workshop that we did. We're going to follow it, and we're going to be running everything they're telling us to do. Instead of going to the console, we're going to be doing it from our terminal. That's how we're going to do this. Now we're getting started. Starting with our networking, VPC networking. So we have create VPC. We want to create VPC. Here in the console, you had to go to VPC and more, run through all these things, and then, but instead of doing that, we are going to go to our available services, and we're going to go looking for VPC. Yes. Or let me see. One moment. So you must be wondering why I went to EC2. So when we were scrolling through here, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing clearly. When we were scrolling through here, I was reminded when I didn't find VPC down here that there is no VPC command, but a lot of things that have to, I think you see here, you see only VPC lattice. Lattice is another whole configuration setup, but there's no VPC here. But most of the things that have to do with networking that I can't find here, I usually check EC2. And why I would like to have the very, very like best explanation to give you right now, I don't. So every time I can't find some networking stuff, I go to check EC2 and I find it there. Maybe also it has to do with the fact that when you go to your EC2 console here, you tend to see a lot of things that you would wonder, but it's not really about the EC2 instance. There's a lot of other things here that are around the instance that you find here, like security groups and all that. So you find security groups here, even when you use security groups for other things. So yeah, I just go to EC2 and I find it there. So here in EC2, we see the command to create VPC. You see the command to create a lot of things that have to do with networking also. Yeah. So I come here and I see create VPC down here. So create, not gateway, create, all those things are here. So create VPC, here we go. This is what it is. Boom. Boom, boom. Sorry. Boom. So create VPC. We're going to run AWS create VPC and all the things that we want to add to it. And let's just go down here. You don't need to read every single thing. We are mostly using the default. You know, we had some changes to add, yes, but mostly we'll be using the default. I'm coming down here to show you what examples can look like. So this is an example here. AWS easy to create VPC, and you pass in the CIDR block. That is the range of IP addresses you want to make available within your VPC. Remember, VPC is virtual private cloud, like isolated. So the IP addresses that you put here is only what the instances or the resources that you create in your VPC would be able to use. Then tag specifications, these are just like tags that you want to add. And this is what is created. So you can see a lot of other things were created by default that you didn't have to configure. Yeah. Same here. This one, they're saying instance tenancy dedicated. That is it's a configuration, a setup that says, okay, you want to have your instances here with like dedicated tenancy, and to create a VPC with IPv6 CIDR block. Normally we usually use IPv4 by default. So if you want IPv6, you have to. So these are just examples, yeah, examples. Now we're going to do our own following our instructions here with the same command. Let's get started. Make sure you log into your environment. I have mine already set up here. If you haven't set up your CLI, then you should go back to week 1 to go and check how to set up your AWS environment. I ran this AWS STS get caller identity. It's also a CLI command to check what user is currently logged into my AWS like CLI, the credentials I have here, and it is the dev user in my account which I want to use. So what we're going to do is AWS EC2 create VPC. But I'm not going to run it here because I want to make sure I have all the options that I want to add already set up from the beginning. So with create VPC in our environment here, we were instructed to make sure that we have 2 availability zones for our VPC. Our VPC is going to be named project VPC. I already have that, so I'm going to create a different one. I'm going to be adding extra naming to everything I'm creating here because I have the exact same environment set up and I want to separate it so we can see clearly. So yes, we're going to name it. We're going to have it over 2 availability zones, and let me see what else. No, all of these are just like default things. We need a VPC endpoint. We need an internet gateway. So let's get started adding these things. We need to add NAT gateway too. So yes, in our create VPC, let's go back and check the options that are going to allow us to add all those configurations that we want to add. Yes, so we have it here. What we want is where is it here? CLI, assign color version region. I'm going to set the region of the VPC. Let me add that. As we pick it out, we're going to be adding it. I'm going to set the region of the VPC to EU Central 1. Okay. I'm going to set the, because I'm using my default profile, I won't be specifying the profile I'm using. Yes, I'll be setting the the IPv4 CIDR block that we would want to set. I think I'll just use, let me see what we have in our environment, so we use the same kind of, but not the same IP addresses, but we'll use the same kind of settings here. So in our VPC, the one that I left running, yeah, here's our existing CIDR range. If you check here, you see that the CIDR range here is different. So whatever you set is what is going to be available for your environment. So I'm going to set 10.1 points, basically this kind of the same thing. So I'm going to set CIDR block. You can see it here. This is what I'm adding here. CIDR block. I'm going to add the value after it. CIDR block 10.1.0.0/16 think this is okay for us to get started, and then we'll attach everything that we want to attach, not gateway, all of that, we'll attach it to the VPC. But from what we have here by default, I think everything is already, yeah, I think everything is ready. Let's go. Let's see that page. Let's run it with a dry run. As without a dry run. Okay, we created this successful. I added the dry run because I usually try to see what is going to be there before it's done, but I've not tried creating a VPC with a dry run before. Yeah, and we have, okay, our CIDR block is associated with our VPC, and we didn't set any IPv6. CIDR block instance tenancy is default, all the default things here, basically, and there we have it. Okay, so now what do we do when we want to see our VPC? There should be a command to list our VPC. So we've created our VPC now. Yes, we've seen it, and if we want to check it, you can always go to here, come in, here's create, somebody create, delete, describe, and down here you can see or we can come back to that at the end of our, let's create everything that we need to create. So we need to create our NAT gateway, we need to create our VPC endpoints, we need to create our subnets and all of that. So let's get started. Here we have our VPC, we need to check that it's here. I didn't name it. I mean, we can still name it here, but you can see it, this is the one here with the 10.1.0.0.16, yeah. And I can give you a little time to look at what we have here. Let me click it so you can have a closer look. You can see that it's just the VPC. Nothing is created yet. No subnet is created. And we have to sort that out. But here, have a look at the details. Okay, and now we can continue from here. I think the first thing we would want to do is to create our subnets. We want to create our subnets and have them associated, like, I mean, creating our subnets in our VPC environment. So here it is. Create subnet. So all these commands are still in the AWS EC2. You can see it up here when you look at it. Yes. Create a subnet in the specified VPC. We're going to be running the same command. I won't be going through every single thing to check all the examples for every command that we're going to be running, but we can just work with this. So we're going to be running this now, Same way we ran the other one, create subnets. We're going to be using AWS EC2 create subnet. So AWS EC2 create subnet. And the first thing we want to specify before all the other options that we have here is our VPC ID. It's the most important thing. It's not an option, it's necessary. So the VPC ID, we're going to be using our VPC ID from the one we created here. As you can see, it's right here. You can also go to your AWS console to check it. And if you want, I was saying that you can check, you can list your VPC here. There should be the command here to list your VPC in EC2. I think maybe it's good for us to just look at it now before we go. Describe. It should be in describe. Yeah, describe VPCs. So if I run AWS EC2 describe VPCs, we should see all the VPCs that we have currently set up. Yes, but like I said, we will be working with this one. So this is what I'm going to copy and use for my, okay, yes, our describe VPCs command has come back, and it's going to be a list of all the VPCs. So look at it like just interacting with AWS API via your console. For your terminal, not the console, for your terminal. So this is what we have. And yeah, back to our EC2 command to create subnet. Subnet VPC ID will be this. I copied it. And let's look to make sure we have everything that we need for our subnet. So you can read all the details if you want, but we're just going to be creating exactly the same environment that we have before. Creating a subnet, we want it to be in a particular availability zone. Yes, availability zone ID. And what else do we want to have? Our CIDR block, yes. Let's see. Region, CIDR block. I think we have everything that we would need. Let's start filling it in. As you can notice, I'm not adding tags to them because it's going to be a lot of typing to be adding tags to everything. But let's go with our availability zone. Here I want to show you something about the availability zone. So here you can have availability zone and you can have availability zone ID. So I will be using availability zone to create exactly in the same subnets that we have before. Yes. So here, availability zone, we're going with this. I think it would be best to actually split the screen so we don't keep going back and forth. Yeah, I think that would be best. Let me bring this a little closer. Oops, I made it too big. Yeah, I think this takes precedence. So yes, our availability zone is going to be for this subnet. No, I haven't copied this properly. Availability zone. And if you had noticed something, you also would notice that there are some commands that you will use. There are some options that you will use for different deployments or different setups. and they are written in the exact same way. So you always see region written as region. It's kind of standard across all AWS services. So the frequently used one, you don't need to always look up what this option will be. Yes. So availability zone, the availability zone we used before here was, a moment, I'm going to check the subnets. And we had EU Central 1A, EU Central 1B. So everything we did was in EU Central 1A, EU Central 1B. We had private subnet, public subnet in both of them. So we're going to be creating 4 subnets. Whoosh. It gets easier. Availability zone EU Central 1A. And we would create the default region EU Central 1 and cider block. It has to be a subnet of the of the main like VPC network that you have created. I think that's exactly what the name is, subnet. So when we have our original VPC as 10.1.0.0 slash, I think it was /16 or /24. I need to check to confirm what we used. But whatever size that we had for our VPC, it has to be less than that, basically. So this was /16, 10.1. It has to be less than that. I'll show you what I mean now. When you look at this other one, the one we set up was 10.0/16, and then the subnets that were inside that were lesser than it. So you know now we're creating everything by ourselves while thinking with it. Here you see 10.0.0/20, that's lesser than /16. And you see that it also changes as you go because it won't be the exact same 10.0.0.0/20. When you check the next one here, you see it's a sub of that 0.144, they're all /20, but all the IP addresses are going to be different because they've already planned it well. This is 16/20, this is 128/20. So we'll be using the same exact kind of numbers because I don't want to start explaining cider block ranges right now, but it's something that you look into if you're interested in networking. These are already calculated, and based on the cider block that you put here, it determines how many IP addresses are going to be available within that cider block range. Yes. So here for our subnet, we'll be using the same format. Yes, I would start with this one that says, yeah, I'll just use this one. 10 points. Ours is 10.128.0/20. And I think that's all that we need to do for this particular subnet. I think everything is covered. Nah, we have everything here. Let's see. Okay, this is the result. Our subnet has been created. Let's look at it. So you saw I didn't have to write down the availability zone ID because we use availability zone already. It means the same, just different representations. Cider block, we have our subnet ID, default for AZ. I think everything is covered. There's something I'm interested in that I want to show you. It's not here. Well, I'll show you here. Let's look at it. So we've created this. this is it. This is the one we just created, 10.1.128. And we have network access control list, everything allowed in, everything allowed out, the default route table in our VPC, we don't have any reservations. So yes, now this network access control list was created by default for our subnet. Every subnet has its network access control list. You don't need to create it by default, but it's always created by default. Now, when you look at this, you see that everything, all traffic is allowed in, all traffic is allowed out. And by default, that makes it a public subnet. The other ones, it was easy for you to identify like, oh, this is a public subnet, this is a private subnet based on the configurations that we've had the name there by default, and that's what we look at and we say, okay, this is public, this is private. But what really makes it public or private is the settings that exist with it. Yes, the settings that exist with it. So here you would see that I'm coming. Where's this? Subnets public. Okay, this allows all, and this denies all, this denies. And we have the private subnet here. So in our EU Central 1A private subnet, so for those that are joining us, we are deploying our AWS 101 workshop via the CLI, the way that we did previously via the console, but making the changes and implementing it from our own CLI by ourselves and exploring the results, of course. So this is, we're looking at the previous subnets that we had deployed, comparing it to what we just set up. And here we have, I think this is bigger, yeah, to look at everything together. So yes, for all your AWS services, there are like multiple levels of security restricting them. But one thing that you would want to know is your security groups allow access to your service. Your network access control list, that's the one that's attached to your subnet, also allows access to your services, but I mean on different levels. So the network access control list is attached to your subnet, and it determines what is allowed inside your subnet and what is not allowed into your subnet. So here we have here we have 8 subnets. Not everything is for us, I would say, because we had the ones that were already created by default. I think I should actually delete them with our default VPC. I would remove them just to not allow any discrepancy. It came by default in the environment. Now there are 4 we created before and 1 we just created now. Yes. Okay, so here we have the subnet public one that we had in our EU Central 1A already, and this is the settings that was there by default. We have our route table, the one that comes with the subnet locally, and when you attach the internet gateway to your subnet, it allows it to send traffic outside, like basically. And here is the network access control list. This is what I was looking at before. So the inbound rules, by default, the network access control list denies generally, actually. By default, it denies everything, and you can add rules to make, I think here it is, yes. It is the network access control list. So you can add rules to allow or deny in your network access control list. But your security group by default, by default also, you can set particular like access for your IP addresses, anything you want to have access into your security group. But whatever comes into your security group by default is allowed out of your security group. So it doesn't deny in that sense of denying things from getting outside. But your network access control list can do that. Yes. So if you want to secure your deployments or your environments, you need to determine at which level, what are the things that you want to restrict, what are the things that you want to allow, and configure them accordingly. Right now, we will be continuing with our deployment. We have one extra subnet that has been set up right now, and we'll be creating the second one. Control C. Following the exact same kind of settings, but we'll be changing this to 144. And we'll be deploying in the same VPC. I'll be changing this to the second availability zone. That was pretty fast. And if we refresh it here, we should have the second, we should have the other one right now. And in this way, we will go ahead and create the 4 of them. And okay, in this way, we'll go ahead and create the 4 of them following the same way we created the subnet. So we already have CIDR block ranges. Let me add this one, the one we want by default. It's definitely easier to create in your console or via infrastructure as code, not as much with your environment, your CLI environment, I mean, because a lot of things that you would originally not deal with, you would be dealing with it here. I went through the subnet here to explain to you that while in your console, you can easily click public or private subnets by default. It doesn't work like that in your CLI creation. You would have to configure the security levels that you want. So here we have, oh no, I created in the same subnet. I created in the same availability, so that's not what we wanted to do. But regardless, yes, we're mostly done with it now. Okay, so we have 4 subnets. There was one that I created 2 in the availability zone. So this is EU Central 1A, this is EU Central 1B, EU Central 1B, and yeah, I want to change one to EU Central 1A. That is not very possible actually. Let's see. That is not very possible. You can change everything, but you cannot change the subnet that it's deployed in. So you need to delete it to yeah. So I think I will delete it. Let's try that. I'll delete it. So this is 10.1.16.0. That's the one. Or rather, I can just copy the subnet ID and filter it. So there should be, I think, AWS easy to delete subnet. Fingers crossed. This is usually how it works. And let me say subnet ID. Yeah, it worked. So you see, it's a pattern. It's a pattern thing. So the last one that we created, I'm going to recreate it, but I'm going to specify EU Central 1A because that's where we want it to be. And then we are done with our subnet creation. I said done, but not really done, because we create the subnets by default, yes, but they are not yet configured whether private, whether public. So I'll do that now, and we would wrap up after this. But following the same method, you are able to go beyond just setting up the network. You can create gateways, you can launch your EC2 instance, you just run the command and it is done. Maybe not in the sense that you're already familiar with, that when you go to the console, there's one page to create everything that has to do with your VPC. You know, here we had to create the VPC, then now create the subnets and specify the VPC ID where we want it to be. And same would go for creating like your NAT gateway, for instance, or your VPC endpoint. You would need to specify those things in this same manner. Yes, individually creating them. That's why I said it's not very ideal for you to make a full project deployed this way. I'm going to make sure I finish this thing, and I'm going to have it ready to show you next week when we do it. But you can explore as much as you want to go. You don't have to go all the way. It's tedious to have you type in the CLI command for everything. But next week I'll be showing you how you can automate this using infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is also going to be interacting with AWS API behind the scene to call the commands to do these things. But we wouldn't have to be creating the subnets one after the other to be getting this response immediately we create it to give us the JSON result of what we just created. No, it won't be like this. But these are things that you need to experience, get familiar with, get at home with, finish a whole project and get your hands dirty debugging. Why is this not working? What is this? How can I delete this via the CLI? How can I list this via the CLI? That's what we're doing here. So next thing for us would be to what do we want to do? Yeah, do you remind me? Yeah, okay, we wanted to say public, private, what makes them different. So okay, you can see what's here. We have this, and I'm going to just filter this. We should have 4. Yes, we should have 4 now in EU Central 1A, EU Central 1A, EU Central 1B, and EU Central 1B. We have 4 subnets, and we're going to have 2 private and 2 public in each subnet. So next thing for us, I think we need to also add our NAT gateways. We need to, let's see what we have set up. Okay. Yeah. So our VPC, our subnets, the route tables that determine what can go to our subnets, and then what can go out of the subnets basically, and then the network connections. So we can just squeeze that in, and then we're done with the VPC setup. We just want to see which route tables we have currently connected to it. Yeah, so right now we have the same route table connected to all of them, and that should be the default route table in our VPC. Yep. Let's compare it to the route table that we have here. So this is, you can see the name here. This is the public route table that is connected to the 2 public instances, but we have individual private route tables for each of our private subnets. Let's look at them closely. I wish we could just so the public has an extra route to the internet gateway when it was created, and the private, I'll just look at one of the private, it shouldn't have a route to the internet gateway. No, it doesn't have a route to the internet gateway, but it has other routes like the NAT gateway and the VPC endpoint that we created for our S3 connection. So we'll be doing something similar with our CLI. Yes, so we'll create 3 route tables. Now we don't have our VPC endpoint or our NAT gateway yet, but those are things that you can always edit after. But we'll create the route tables. We have our local route in everything, and that's what we're going to start with. Then we'll add the internet gateway to the route table, and we'll add the NAT gateway, the VPC endpoint to the private NAT tables, to the private route tables too. So here we have, no, this is not here. Yes, so this was where we created our subnet. We're going back to the EC2, and I think I'm just going to search instead of scrolling. Routes table. We're not associating right now. We are creating route table. So this is the instruction to create route table following the same pattern of AWS EC2 create route table. It's starting to feel like a routine job at this point. That's why we won't go through every single thing. AWS EC2 create route table. We'll put a VPC ID. And we're using the same VPC ID we have been using all evening. VPC ID. And is there anything that we want to do here? We are not adding anything, just the region. And that's all. Region EU Central 1. If you want to name your resources, like the way there are names in the other ones that we created, you just type the name there. Like no pressure, no other thing you need to do. Just type the name there. So this is a route table that we just created. And by default, it has the association. No, it does. Let me confirm. Does it? No, it doesn't have any association right now. There's only the local one that is there. You see this one that is local here. You would always have it by default in the route tables you create. Once you say, okay, it's in this VPC, it's going to take the, it's going to take the local VPC CIDR. Notice the entire CIDR block for our entire VPC, and that's what it's going to take once you specify the VPC that the route table is going to be in. So we're creating 3 route tables, remember, having the same kind of what we call it now the same kind of setup, basically. Yes, here you can see the details of this one. Now I'm going to be creating one same setting I put here, VPC ID and create route table. I want to name this one. I will say private 1 easy 1. Let's see. Also, I didn't put the name.